The Johto Pokemon games are in a super interesting spot with the fandom. I feel like just 5 to 10 years ago, these were considered to be some of the best entries in the series, and I don't want to make it seem like that's not how they're viewed nowadays or they're underrated or anything like that, but I feel like it's hard to ignore how the internet Pokemon fandom's opinions on these games have turned with time. I know this isn't the most scientific metric, but I looked at a bunch of those Pokemon game tier list videos that are government mandated for PokeTubers to do, and that's not me hating, by the way, because I've done them too. So I looked at a bunch of the tier lists from around 2020 and then some of the ones that came out now, and it's hard to not notice how the Johto games have just started to slide down ever so slightly with time. I've also been seeing a lot of videos pop up in my recommended criticizing these games, and I'm just going to say it now, a lot of the popular criticisms with these games are valid. The main complaint people have with this game is that the level curve is bad, which it is. There's honestly no defending it because no other mainline Pokemon game has balancing just as bad as the Johto games. The fact that within legitimately 10 minutes of gameplay, you can go from fighting Chuck, whose ace is a level 31 Poliwrath, to fighting Jasmine, whose ace is a level 35 Steelix, is like the prime example of the balancing here. And then after fighting Jasmine, you have to go deal with the two shittiest rocket bases in the series. Like, genuinely, the teleporter bases from Gen 1 are better, where all of the trainer Pokemon are like level 20, and you just can't get enough experience to close the EXP gap that just happened. And that's not even mentioning how Claire's ace is a level 40 Kingdra, and then within legitimately an hour or an hour and a half of gameplay later, you're fighting the champion with Lance, who has multiple high level 40 Dragonites. This game is just hard to stay on par level-wise with, way harder than any other entry in the series. And on top of all of that, right after the 7th gym, all of the wild Pokemon stopped gaining levels for some reason. So if you wanted to grind, it would just take forever because the experience you're getting from the wild Pokemon is just so low compared to other games. The level curve leads to you needing to grind in the game where grinding is at its worst and least efficient. And while this in itself isn't game ruining, it makes replaying these games a lot more of a chore than it needs to be, and that is a big issue when this franchise is built on its replayability. This leads into another common complaint with these games, and that's going to be the dex itself, and not really in terms of design, because honestly there are a lot of really fantastic Johto Pokemon, but it is objectively the weakest dex in the series. Shoutouts to Zebra21 on Reddit for getting the stats so I don't have to, but Johto is the second weakest region in terms of base stat total, and honestly I'd argue that his numbers are wrong, because Johto has the least amount of 3-stage evolutions, which means there are less middle stage Pokemon to bring that stat average down. There are legitimately only 3-stage evolution lines within the Johto dex, and those are going to be the Ampharos line, the Jumpluff line, and the Tyranitar line. Most of the Pokemon you will add to your team before Lance will either just outright not evolve or be fully done evolving before level 30. On top of that, the Johto dex is probably the dex with the least type diversity as well. 58 out of the 100 new Pokemon fall under the grass, bug, normal, or water typing. And obviously I'm aware of dual types, yes. But besides the water type, none of these are typings that people are racing to double up on their team. For example, if you want to use an electric type, you are probably using Ampharos or Lantern, and there are a lot of better water types to use than Lantern, and I'm saying this as someone that loves that Pokemon. And there are other typings this works with as well. If you wanted to use a fire type on your team and you didn't pick Cyndaquil, your options are just so limited. So limited, in fact, that none of the new Johto fire types are even available in Johto. And that leads into another valid complaint with these games, and it's that a lot of the most fun and new Johto Pokemon aren't even available until after you've beaten the Johto champion. I gotta read this one off the script, y'all, but Houndour, Larvitar, Scizor, Steelix, Misdreavus, Slugma, and Murkrow all aren't even available in Johto. And this all in conjunction with the level scales leads to a lot of long, samey routes with samey trainer battles that just aren't the most interesting. The enemy trainers don't have a lot of type diversity either, so these rocket hideouts or long routes are just filled with these battles that all kind of blend together, and worst of all, don't even really give you any experience points either. Another thing people tend to complain about with these games is the story, or rather the lack thereof, but honestly for me, I play these games to fight these funny little monsters and raise a funny little team, not to fucking read, so that doesn't really bother me personally. I actually much prefer this to the Switch era of Pokemon where these games don't shut the fuck up and don't even have a story interesting enough to warrant that. Shoutouts to Ultra Sun and Moon though, this criticism doesn't apply to those games.
I'd like to get to know you a little better after all. This guy's evil. Chairman, we should really be going. Yeah, this dude's absolutely evil. He's a fucking dad bod.
But from what I can gather, those are the generally most major complaints with the game, and I don't want to just shit on these games because they had their acclaim for a reason. And I think it's honestly as simple as just the Johto vibes are fantastic. Whether you're playing Heart Gold, Soul Silver, or the originals, these games just look, sound, and feel great to exist in. And as weird of a compliment as it is to give to these games, I just love the tile sets for Gen 2. Each town feels really distinct, and the music honestly really helps with that as well. And it also has the most post-game content out of any one of these Pokemon games. You are able to fully explore Kanto, challenge the 8 gym leaders, there's new locations and new dialogue there as well. Back to the complaints, however, in short, the biggest ones people have are going to be the level curve, the overall weak decks and lacks of type diversity, as well as the non-existent story. A few weeks ago, I ended up reflecting on these games and just found these design decisions to be baffling. No other entry in the series really has these problems, so what went wrong here? Was it a victim of being the first ever sequel, so these elements just weren't as refined? Because honestly, I don't buy that. Gen 1, as broken as it was, doesn't face any of these issues. These thoughts eventually led to a theory that I think you might find interesting. What if Kanto just isn't post-game? Simple as that. I read through PDFs of both the original manual and the original strategy guide for Gold and Silver, and I couldn't find a single line of text where they addressed the Kanto region in this game as post-game. The SS Aqua page says you get the ticket to get on board after beating the Elite Four. The Olivine City page says you can't do anything at the Bay until after you beat the Elite Four. The Lance and Elite Four page doesn't say it's the final battle or the end of the main quest, and it even still calls Red the champ. The manual also makes no mention of Lance, Red, or whatever you could consider the endgame to be. And while you could consider the credits rolling after you beat Lance as to be confirmation that Kanto is in fact postgame, when you beat Red, the credits roll as well. So what if it just happens whenever you beat a champion? As far as I'm aware, there has been no official mention declaring Kanto to be post-game content, and when you look at and play these games as a 16-badge experience, a lot of these design decisions actually make more sense. Typically, when you play Pokemon, you add members to your team with a pace. You aren't walking into the first gym with a full team of 6, and you probably aren't walking into the 7th gym with just 2 Pokemon. There's a pace to which you add members to your team, and if we look at this game as a 16-badge journey instead of an 8-badge journey, the low experience in Johto makes a lot more sense considering the fact that you might have been expected to only have 4 to 5 Pokemon instead of a full team. If Lance's battle is the halfway point in these games, then you really shouldn't expect to have a full team of Pokemon, or at least shouldn't expect them to all be on par with the leveling, because you don't normally have a full team by the 4th gym. It makes the Kanto exclusive Johto Pokemon make a lot more sense too, because why would they blow their load showing off all of the new Pokemon in Johto when there is a whole ass second region with 8 new badges to explore? Like, no other Pokemon game introduces all of its newly created Pokemon within the first half of the game. And the lower evolution levels and strength of the Johto Pokemon make a lot of sense here too, considering the fact that you won't even get to those levels until late or even after the initial campaign. Now, just because Kanto, as far as I'm aware, has never been officially declared post-game by Game Freak doesn't mean they didn't say it somewhere. I could just be missing something. But for the sake of this video, I ended up replaying through the entirety of Pokemon Gold to put this to the test. I wanted to see how these games felt and how the balancing was when I built my team around the thought that Kanto isn't post-game. I'm playing Gold over the remakes because I wanted to give these games as little to work with as possible. There are less trainers, less Pokemon with less EXP, and all of the major battles are largely the same level-wise outside of Faulkner's weird-ass level 9 Pidgeotto. Some gyms may have a level or 2 added onto some Pokemon here or there, but nothing major to alter the experience, and to me this isolates the elements of the game that I wanted to put to the test. And with that all being said, let's see how it played out. I'm just going to say it quick and easy. When I played the game in this fashion and beat the Johto region with just a team of 4, I never had to grind once. I was consistently on par with the level curve, or in some cases even over-leveled. Playing this game in this fashion does have drawbacks that I'll get into later, but my hypothesis on the level curve was 100% right. And with the ability to battle basically any trainer in Kanto whenever you want the second you get there, it makes leveling up those team members that you'll add in Kanto a lot easier. This honestly might have been the most enjoyable playthrough of these games I've ever had because I didn't spend the second half of Johto just fighting with the game's level curve. Hell, even the shitty Team Rocket bases with all the underleveled Pokemon actually helped me raise my weaker members of my team when playing this game in this context. Conveniently enough, this is when the wild Pokemon start to get really underleveled too, so these Rocket bases can actually provide as really valuable experience for the weaker members of your team. And the fact that I'm only looking to build a team of 4 in Johto instead of a team of 6 actually makes the wild Pokemon selection being so not varied and kind of weak a lot more forgiving. It's still the complaint that I think is the most valid, but because of the lower amount of team slots, it kind of artificially makes that competition for what makes your team more of a close race. Johto's poor wild Pokemon type diversity matters less here for this reason as well. And bonus for always having 2 open party slots for HM slaves, yes, needing HMs does suck, but it's at least slightly more convenient this way. So yeah, my thoughts on the level curve being balanced around a 16 badge experience instead of an 8 badge experience is right, or at least it feels right. There was something that happened on my replay of these games that I didn't quite anticipate, and now maybe it's because I haven't played through the Kanto sides of these games since I was a kid, but I honestly forgot how good Kanto's implementation is here. I was anticipating essentially a trimmed down version of Gen 1 just kind of thrown alongside the Johto region, but what I ended up playing felt like a lot more than that. Yeah, it's the same region, but instead of starting off in Pallet Town, you get dropped into Vermilion City, you have all of your HMs and the ability to explore and do anything in really whatever order you want. This alone is super unique to the series, as you almost never have the ability to explore a region and do anything in whatever order you want. Hell, the first Pokemon game to actually let you do this came out in 2022. That alone makes this version of Kanto a lot more fun to explore than I would have thought going into it, and that's not even talking about all of the new content exclusive to the Johto games. It might not seem like much to people who are less familiar with the Kanto games, but as someone who grew up playing Pokemon Fire Red, it's honestly really cool to see how the region has changed with time. Or like how the house that got robbed in Cerulean City has now turned into the Cerulean Police Department, and the NPCs inside will actually directly reference the robbery. Or going to Bill's house in Kanto and seeing that his grandfather's actually doing the housekeeping for him because Bill lives in the Johto region now. Or how Cinnabar Island got hit with a volcano, so now Blaine's gym isn't a gym, it's just in this sorry-ass cave while he waits for remodels to happen. Or, and this one made me kind of sad, how Red's mom just misses him. She's worried about her son because he hasn't called her since he left to go train on Mount Silver. There are tons of little nuggets of information and lore that add to the Kanto region that I was just totally unaware of. It's the only time in the series that you've been allowed to revisit a region outside of the context of its original games, and I've honestly personally never given it enough credit for that. There are also new locations and gym leader swaps worth mentioning as well. Koga had been promoted from the 6th gym leader in Kanto to an Elite 4 member, so his daughter Janine takes over his gym for him. Giovanni is nowhere to be found in these games, so your old rival from Gen 1, Blue, ends up taking over the gym for him, which is just really cool to me. The new locations are cool too. I was actually pretty shocked when I went into Mount Moon, expecting to see the same old Mount Moon that we all know and like, but what I was actually greeted with was a bunch of ladders and the ability to climb up the mountain, and on top there's just something called Mount Moon Square, and yeah, it has a little medicine house and a flower field, and there's nothing major. It's just cool to see that they put love in all these areas again. There are other cool little things as well, like for example, I never ever knew that the magnet train was a thing, or that it even existed. And it's cool to see how they redo cities as well. Like, it was really interesting how they redid Lavender Town and how the original Pokemon Tower is now a radio tower, and they confined the cemetery into a smaller, almost tourist-like attraction. All of this is cool to me because it's new canon content that I was unaware of, and I honestly would bet that it's probably new for some of you as well. I doubt that a lot of people have taken a super deep dive into the Kanto sides of these games recently. My perception of Kanto in these games was that it was cool, but never a main reason as to why you would go and play these games, but after playing again, I want to kill that notion because I think Kanto is just as essential to the Gen 2 experience as Johto is. And another thing I wanted to add, because I just feel like it's really understated due to its status as a secret boss or post-game boss, but it's really fucking cool when you go and fight Red. I don't know if it's the 16 badge buildup or just the sheer level that Red's Pokemon are, but it's honestly the most satisfying champion / final battle in the series. And that's not even including the sheer aura of fighting the protagonist from the game before. Like, that is just so fucking cool on so many levels. Come on. Crit. If we outspeed, I know Curse has lowered our speed to hell and back, so we probably still don't outspeed, right? But if we outspeed right here... There we go. Trainer Red was defeated. That gets 5 strong booms on the boom meter. That was really fun. That was really fun. Like, I've never done the Red battle in my life. That was tough. And I was under-leveled, but it was totally doable. That's awesome. That was a great fight. I am actually so happy I decided to go and do that. But that's enough glazing. There are drawbacks to playing through Johto with only 4 Pokemon, and I want to cover them here. And the main one is going to be its pacing. Depending on how you build your team, there could totally be a large stretch of time where you just only have 1 or 2 Pokemon on your team. They've already evolved, and the battles just aren't too interesting. The game's playtime obviously shoots up when you play through Kanto fully as well, and with the little to no story that's here, it sometimes feels like just walking through routes in Battling Simulator. I will say that I do think the pros of playing this way do outweigh the cons. I would much rather play a Pokemon game that just is really slow at points than one that is just outright broken in terms of balancing. I don't want to overly defend the design decisions that led to people not loving these games in the first place either, because they could have just fixed them. They could have just made it so the level scaling in Johto was good enough to support a full team of 6 and then rebalanced Kanto accordingly. They could have still made the wild Pokemon selection in Johto more interesting, and I don't think that it's right that you have to play the game this way to fix it, but still, playing the games like this is the most enjoyable way to play them. With that all being said, I would like to leave you with some tips and tricks to playing through the Johto region with only 4 Pokemon on your team. First and foremost, you are going to need some type of offensive ice type option. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you can get the Ice Beam and Blizzard TMs in Goldenrod City, and in the originals, you can get the Ice Punch TM, but you will need something to handle Lance and his 3 Dragonites, because handling them when you only have 4 viable Pokemon on your team is just really, really difficult. Plan your team out well. You are going to need a good diversity of types, and you're also going to want stuff to handle the most common types in Johto. Those are going to be Grass, Poison, Normal, and Flying types. If you're underleveled for the red battle, don't worry about it. I just beat him while being around 20 to 30 levels below him. But if you need grinding, rematching the Elite Four is great for both experience and money. And if you're playing the originals, the Elite Four doesn't get any harder, so it's just super reliable. And yes, grinding, I know, isn't a great solution, but this is the easiest grinding will literally ever be in the Johto games. If you're struggling with Whitney, go and trade for that Machop and Goldenrod and just use it in the gym. It'll get boosted experience, so you should be able to get it leveled up in the normal type gym enough to where it can handle Whitney's Miltank. And now, this really isn't a tip, but if you're playing through Heart Gold and Soul Silver again and you want a Pokemon recommendation, I highly recommend Noctowl. It is my favorite regional bird, and I feel like it doesn't get the respect it deserves for how well it performs in the Johto games. The only investment you need to have with it is make sure it's level 42 before the Elite Four, so you can learn the move Extrasensory, and as well as giving it Morty's Shadow Ball TM. Now, what does that do? It basically whoops the Elite Four's ass. You have an effective matchup or move against 3 out of the 4 members of the Elite Four. It also learns the move Fly, which is just nice because you won't have to have an HM slave doing it for you. This isn't really a tip, but if you're someone who feels compelled enough to replay these games in this way because of this video and you like Chikorita, please use Chikorita and let me know how it goes. Unfortunately, Chikorita is probably the worst starter in terms of how it performs in its game, and that's just because it loses in Johto. It loses to the first 2 gyms, it can't do anything in Sprout Tower, and it just really struggles to get its foot on the ground, and even worse, it doesn't have any super effectiveness against any of the major trainers in the region. However, Grass-type starters perform a lot better in the Kanto game, so I'd wonder how Chikorita does after Johto. It gets such a bad rep for how much it sucks in Johto, which is valid. However, in Kanto, it should have a favorable matchup against around half of the gym leaders, so I just wonder how it'll perform there. I entered this video wanting to replay Gold and Silver to test the level curve and Pokemon diversity in a 16 badge experience. And I left the video wishing I had played Heart Gold and Soul Silver instead and gotten to experience this playthrough with prettier visuals, prettier music, more Pokemon to play with, more new content, and better move pools to work with. Despite this was my most enjoyable playthrough of these games I've really ever had. And I don't have a defense for the poor design decisions in Johto exclusive playthroughs of these games because they could have just balanced Johto right the first time around and then rebalanced Kanto accordingly. What I do have is a band-aid that you can put over those design decisions that will maximize your ability to enjoy the Johto vibe. This band-aid also encourages people to play through content that they might not have played through in a while. At least speaking for myself, I know I haven't. So please try these games with your mentality for your team building being based around playing through the Kanto side of these games. While these games haven't climbed a ton up my personal favorites list, and that honestly might be in part due to me not playing Heart Gold and Soul Silver for this video, it's not Gen 2's fault. My favorite Pokemon games will probably stay my favorite Pokemon games until I die. But I do have a lot more respect for what these games are trying to do, trying to add a new region while also further developing the one that came before it. I have a ton more respect for the Game Boy Color originals of these games as well, because these games only came out 3 years after the original Red and Green, and despite that, they have double the overworld size and just in general try to do a lot for a sequel, especially at this point in time in the gaming world. If you're somebody like me who is always hesitant to replay these games due to just how grind heavy it can get and just how unmoving the dex is and things like that, I actually really recommend you try it out 16 badge style. And if you do try it this way, please let me know how that goes for you in the comments. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, do all that nonsense. If you made it this far in the video, you know I love you. If I see one more dipshit on the internet called Johto the worst region when Galar is literally right there, I'm gonna lose my mind. But peace, y'all.